At a lavish London auction, three thugs saw a 60-year-old man in a tailored suit as their easy target. They were about to receive a lesson that would go viral overnight. The air in the Chamberlain auction house was thick with the scent of old money, a subtle blend of polished mahogany, aging paper, and vintage champagne. Housed in what was once a bastion of British banking, the hall retained its imposing grandeur. Marble columns soared towards a frescoed ceiling, their cold permanence a stark contrast to the fleeting ambitions of the men and women seated below on plush velvet chairs. Every cough was muffled, every whisper discreet. This was a sanctuary of silent, high-stakes warfare. Jason Statham entered not with a bang, but with the quiet confidence of a man who had nothing to prove. At 60, his movements were deliberate, economical, each step conveying a sense of coiled energy beneath the surface. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that fit him like a second skin, the kind of tailoring that speaks of quality without shouting its price. His hair was closely cropped, revealing a map of hard-earned discipline etched onto his features. He wasn't here for the spectacle. He was here for a prize. He took a seat in a shadowy corner, his eyes sharp and analytical, scanning the room before settling on the glossy pages of the auction catalog. He wasn't invisible, but he projected an aura that discouraged interruption. He was an island of calm in a sea of nervous energy. That calm was shattered by the arrival of Alexei. Young, brash, and dripping with the kind of wealth that hadn't yet learned subtlety, he strode and flanked by three men who were less bodyguards and more walking billboards for aggression. Alexei was draped in a gaudy designer jacket that seemed to scream for attention, a stark contrast to the timeless elegance of the room. His lead enforcer, a man named Rico with a scorpion tattoo creeping up his thick neck, surveyed the room with a predator's dismissive glare. They laughed too loudly, their voices echoing off the marble, a jarring note in the symphony of refined silence. Alexei's gaze swept the room, cataloging the competition before it landed on Statham. His eyes narrowed, not on Statham's face, but on the discreet Patek Philippe peeking from under his cuff. It was a watch that spoke of legacy, not lottery winnings. A smirk played on Alexei's lips as he leaned in to whisper to Rico. Rico's eyes found Statham. The challenge was immediate and vulgar. He locked his gaze with Statham's and slowly, deliberately, drew a thumb across his throat. It was a crude pantomime of dominance, a promise of violence in a place that pretended to be above such things. Statham didn't flinch. He slowly raised his eyes from the catalog, meeting Rico's stare. There was no anger, no fear, just a flat, cold assessment. He held the gaze for a heartbeat, an eternity in the silent room, before calmly turning a page and returning to his reading. The dismissal was more potent than any threat he could have made in return. The first move had been made, and the board was set. The auction progressed with the steady, rhythmic pace of a ticking clock. Art, jewelry, and artifacts came and went, each sale a small drama of raised paddles and quiet nods. Then, the main event arrived. The auctioneer's voice took on a reverent tone as he introduced Lot 307, the Phantom, a one-of-a-kind Patek Philippe Grandmaster chime, legendary for its complex movement and the mysterious history of its ownership. A hush fell over the room. This was the trophy everyone was waiting for. The bidding opened high and climbed rapidly. One by one, contenders dropped out, their ambitions crashing against the wall of astronomical figures. Soon, only two remained. Alexei, fueled by ego, would aggressively raise the bid in large, theatrical increments, often turning to flash a triumphant grin at the audience. His paddle shot up with the explosive energy of a man desperate to be seen as a winner. Statham, in contrast, was a study in precision. He never seemed rushed. He would let Alexei have his moment of peacocking. Then, just as the auctioneer's gavel began its descent, his paddle would rise with quiet, unshakable certainty. His bids were calculated, clinical, always just enough to deflate Alexei's momentum and reclaim control. It was a psychological masterclass. The tension became a physical presence in the room. The price soared into the millions. Alexei's face, once flush with confidence, was now beaded with sweat. His bravado was cracking, replaced by a raw, frustrated anger. He couldn't understand how this old man in the corner could so effortlessly dismantle his display of power. During a brief pause, as the price crossed a new threshold, Rico rose from his seat. He moved with a practiced menace, weaving through the chairs until he stood beside Statham. He leaned down, his voice a low, gravelly whisper meant only for him. The old man should know his limits. Rico breathed, his words laced with the scent of expensive cologne and cheap threats. Mr. Alexei advises you to enjoy your retirement. Some prizes are for a younger generation. Statham didn't turn his head. His eyes remained fixed on the auctioneer, but a slight muscle twitched in his jaw. He flipped a page of the catalog, the crisp sound cutting through Rico's intimidation. "Tell your boss," Statham replied, his voice equally low but as sharp and clear as cut glass, "that it's better to read a book than to just look at the price tag." Rico's eyes narrowed into slits. The insult, delivered with such calm indifference, was a direct hit to his and Alexei's pride. His hand shot out, slamming down on Statham's catalog, pinning it to the table. The sharp crack echoed in the silent room. "I don't think you heard me," Rico hissed, his face inches from Statham's. Several guests turned their heads, their expressions a mixture of alarm and morbid curiosity. The pretense of civility had just been shattered. The auctioneer, sensing the dangerous shift in atmosphere, tried to regain control. "Do I have a further bid, gentlemen?" he asked, his voice strained. Ignoring Rico's presence completely, Statham calmly met the auctioneer's gaze and gave a subtle, decisive nod. The auctioneer's face flooded with relief. "Sold," he declared, his gavel falling with a resounding crack that sealed Alexei's defeat. A wave of polite applause rippled through the room, but it was drowned out by the palpable tension radiating from Alexei's table. His face was a mask of pure fury. He had been beaten, and more importantly, he had been made to look weak. Statham closed his catalog and stood, preparing to move to the private acquisitions office to finalize the purchase. This was the moment Alexei had been waiting for. As Statham entered a quieter, secluded corridor that led to the office, Rico and the other two thugs materialized from the shadows, blocking his path. The corridor was still visible to a handful of staff and guests lingering near the main hall, a semi-public stage for the coming drama. "You think you won?" Rico snarled, stepping forward. He shoved Statham hard against the ornate, wood-paneled wall. The impact was solid. The auction paddle and catalog clattered to the polished marble floor. Rico grabbed the lapels of Statham's expensive suit, twisting the fine fabric in his fist. "This suit costs more than your life is worth, old man." Another of the thugs, a brutish man with a shaved head, stepped up and slapped Statham across the face. Not a punch, but a demeaning, open-handed slap, the sound sharp and humiliating. The third thug laughed. "Where's your movie magic now, huh? No stunt double here to save you." The verbal assault escalated. They mocked his age, his films, his perceived irrelevance. To them, he was a relic, a faded star they could extinguish for their own amusement and their boss's fragile ego. Rico, wanting to inflict the ultimate insult, leaned in close and spat on the gleaming toe of Statham's Oxford shoe. A glob of saliva glistened under the soft lighting. Throughout the entire ordeal, Statham remained unervingly still. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. His body was relaxed, absorbing the pushes and the slap without tension. But his eyes were alive. They were cold, analytical instruments recording everything. The precise angle of Rico's stance. The way the second thug shifted his weight before the slap. The nervous energy of the third. He was processing data, calculating trajectories, mapping out the inevitable conclusion. This wasn't submission. It was a predator allowing its prey to walk deeper into the trap. His stillness was more unsettling than any outburst could have been. "Look at him," Rico sneered, releasing his lapels with a final, contemptuous shove. "The legend has nothing left." He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. He turned to his men, confident his work was done. He had broken the old man's spirit in front of an audience. As he turned, a voice cut through the air behind him. It was quiet, devoid of emotion, yet it carried an unmistakable weight of finality. "You boys done laughing?" The words hung in the air, cold and heavy. Rico froze, the triumphant smirk on his face faltering. He turned back slowly, an uneasy feeling creeping into his gut. The man leaning against the wall was gone. In his place stood someone else. Statham was no longer slouched, but stood at his full height, his shoulders squared. The look in his eyes had transformed from passive observation to lethal focus. "What did you say?" Rico grunted, trying to reclaim his dominance with a shove. He pushed at Statham's chest, but this time, it was like pushing against a concrete pillar. His hand stopped dead, the force of his own push jarring his arm. A collective gasp came from a few onlookers who had been watching in horrified silence. Before Rico could process what had happened, Statham's hand moved. It wasn't a punch, it was a blur of motion, faster than the eye could properly track. He seized Rico's wrist, his fingers finding the precise pressure points. With a single, fluid twist, he used the heavy, diamond-encrusted watch on Rico's own wrist as a lever, locking the joint. A sickening crackle of cartilage echoed in the corridor. Rico screamed, a high-pitched sound of agony that was utterly at odds with his tough guy persona. His knees buckled, and he crashed to the marble floor, cradling his now useless arm. The second thug, seeing his leader fall, reacted on pure instinct, throwing a clumsy, rage-fueled punch. Statham pivoted on the ball of his foot, the punch whistling past his ear. As the thug's momentum carried him forward, Statham grabbed the hardcover auction catalog from the floor. In one smooth motion, he swung it like a weapon, the reinforced corner connecting squarely with the man's throat. The thug choked, a strangled gurgling sound escaping his lips as he stumbled backward, clutching at his neck, his eyes wide with shock and pain. The third man, momentarily paralyzed by the speed of the assault, made a desperate lunge, trying to tackle Statham from behind. It was a fatal mistake. Statham, seemingly aware of the attack without even looking, dropped his center of gravity and spun, his elbow striking the man's ribs with the force of a hammer blow. A sharp crack of bone was audible. Statham then grabbed the man by his designer jacket and used his momentum to spin him directly into the path of the oncoming security guards who were just rounding the corner. The entire sequence had taken less than 5 seconds. Where 3 menacing thugs had stood, there was now only wreckage. Rico was writhing on the floor, the other 2 groaning and incapacitated. The corridor had fallen into a stunned, absolute silence. The onlookers, some of whom were now recording on their phones, stared with a mixture of terror and awe. The legend wasn't gone. He had just been waiting for the cameras to roll. The 2 uniformed security guards who had just arrived skidded to a halt, their professional composure evaporating as they took in the scene. They saw 3 large men, known associates of the volatile Alexei, completely neutralized on the floor. And standing calmly amidst the chaos was the man they were supposed to be protecting, looking as if he'd just finished a brisk walk. He hadn't even broken a sweat. One of the down thugs, the one with the bruised throat, scrambled to his feet, his face contorted with a mixture of pain and disbelief. He looked around wildly, his eyes landing on a heavy, brass champagne bucket on a nearby serving stand. With a desperate roar, he seized it and charged, swinging the makeshift weapon at Statham's head. Statham didn't retreat. He moved forward into the attack. With an almost casual grace, he deflected the swinging bucket with one forearm, the impact ringing out like a gong. He simultaneously hooked his other hand around the man's wrist, disarming him in an instant. He now held the heavy brass bucket. Before the thug could react, Statham drove the rim of the bucket into his chest, not with enough force to kill, but with a brutal, focused impact that sent a shockwave through the man's body, knocking the wind from his lungs and sending him crashing back into the wall. The bucket clattered to the floor. The last conscious thug, the one with the likely broken ribs, tried to get up, but a swift, precise kick from Statham to his sciatic nerve sent a jolt of paralyzing pain up his leg, and he collapsed back to the ground, moaning. Statham stood tall, the absolute master of the situation. He methodically straightened the lapels of his suit, brushing off an imaginary piece of lint. His breathing was even, his expression impassive. He looked down at Rico, who was now staring up at him, the arrogance in his eyes replaced by pure, unadulterated fear. Statham knelt beside him, not aggressively, but with the calm demeanor of a doctor examining a patient. He picked up his fallen auction paddle. "You wrinkled my suit," he said, his voice a low, menacing whisper. He tapped the paddle gently against Rico's cheek. "You spat on my shoes." Another tap. "But your biggest mistake," he paused, leaning in closer, his voice dropping to a near inaudible growl, "was that you chose the wrong man to embarrass." The words were more devastating than any physical blow. They were a complete and utter annihilation of Rico's identity, a judgment delivered from a level of existence he couldn't comprehend. The security guards just stood there, frozen, understanding that they were witnessing something far outside their pay grade. They weren't looking at a victim. They were looking at the very definition of authority. With the physical threat neutralized, Statham's focus shifted to the source of the problem. He rose, his gaze cutting through the stunned onlookers until it found Alexei, who had been watching the entire exchange from the end of the corridor, his face pale with shock. Statham didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply gestured with his head towards the acquisitions office. It was a silent, undeniable command. Shaking, Alexei followed. Inside the private office, Statham calmly took the bill of sale from the stunned auction house manager. He didn't sign it. Instead, he slid the document and a fountain pen across the polished desk to where Rico had been dragged in by security. Statham dipped the tip of the pen into a small pool of blood that had dripped from Rico's split lip onto the desk. Then he looked at Alexei. "Your man made a mess. Your man will clean it up." He guided Rico's trembling hand, forcing him to sign the credit authorization. But he didn't stop there. He then moved Rico's hand to the line on the form marked gratuity/gift. He made him write a figure with 6 zeros, a multi-million-dollar tip to a charity for retired veterans. It was the ultimate humiliation, not just paying for the watch he lost, but being forced to make a massive donation, his own blood sealing the transaction. It was poetic, brutal, and utterly final. The aftermath was immediate and devastating. Within an hour, dozens of phone videos of the auction house beatdown hit the internet. They went viral overnight. News outlets picked up the story, contrasting the grainy phone footage with the glossy images of Statham's film career. He became a trending topic worldwide. For Alexei, the fallout was catastrophic. He became an international laughingstock, the arrogant crypto bro who tried to bully a real-life action hero and paid for it, literally. His investors pulled out, his business partners distanced themselves, and his empire, built on bravado, began to crumble. Statham, on the other hand, never commented publicly. He didn't have to. He was seen a week later, quietly attending a charity event, the legendary Phantom watch on his wrist. It was no longer just a timepiece. It was a symbol. This wasn't just a fight. It was a lesson in respect. A reminder that true strength doesn't need to be loud. If you agree, drop the word respect in the comments below. This story reminds us to never judge a book by its cover, because you never know what kind of lion the quiet man used to be. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories where legends remind us why they are legends.